Despite what you've heard, the SAVE Act would not just affect and disenfranchise millions of married women. In fact, it would affect citizens across all demographics. But yes, married women and other marginalized communities would be most heavily affected, as per usual. Thank you for the request. This has been a hot button issue in the last few days, so let's clear up some of the conflicting information. In the meantime, if you just want a little bit of advice, ladies, don't take your husband's last name. Firstly, there's conflicting information about whether or not this bill has passed the House. Some people say it has, some people say it hasn't, and it has just been introduced. And the fact is, everyone is right. As you know, every couple years we get a new Congress as members are replaced, and the same bill can be introduced and voted on multiple times in different Congresses. A version of this bill was introduced and passed the House back in July of 2024, and a version of this bill was just reintroduced in January of this year for this Congress. HR 22 is this year's version, and as you can see, has a bunch of co-sponsors listed. The way this is structured is that it's amending the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which makes it a little bit more confusing to read through because every clause is basically structured to say to strike this and add this from the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. Because the previous version passed in the last House, there's no reason to think that this won't pass this one. There's actually a few reasons why people are so concerned about this bill. Let's talk about the main one that's been kind of making the rounds lately. Married women will not be able to vote. Yes and no. One of the things this bill does is that it increases the threshold or the requirements for identification documents for registering to vote and proving citizenship. If you've ever registered yourself, you know that there are already requirements for proving your eligibility. And despite no evidence of widespread fraud or ineligible people registering, they're trying to raise the requirements, which will disenfranchise and prevent eligible people from successfully registering. So the proof of citizenship that they want to require include real IDs that indicate that the applicant is a citizen of the United States. The problem is most real IDs don't inherently do that. This varies state by state. In New York, which is where I am, we have something called an enhanced driver's license, which does serve as proof of citizenship. In fact, you can cross either the Canadian or Mexican border with one of these, but only 5 states have EDLs. So if I'm not mistaken, most people would have to use one of these other methods to prove citizenship, and this is where it gets really wonky because the methods include either a passport, which not everyone has, or it requires a combination of matching documents, usually including some form of birth certificate or proof of birth. There's a bunch of combinations listed, so I won't go through each one of them, but this is where the married women issue comes in. If someone's ever gotten a name change, for example, a woman taking on her husband's last name when she gets married, their birth certificate will not match their other forms of ID. So that becomes a huge problem. Also, by the way, a birth certificate can be difficult to acquire, but there are also other specific situations you may not think of. Number 2, it effectively gets rid of mail-in and online voter registration because it requires the presentation of citizenship proof in person. Also, by the way, in my perusal, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing no allowances made for photocopies or scans of documents. Number 3 big issue, it basically forces states to retroactively apply these requirements and encourages huge registration purges. It also holds employees criminally liable for any registration errors, which means that there's going to be a lot of employees turning away people who have the right documentation just because they personally don't recognize the document or think that there's an issue or whatever. We've seen it happen before. So basically, while this act doesn't specifically target married women, nor would all married women be affected, nor would married women be the only people affected. Yes, this act is creating additional and unnecessary hurdles to increase disenfranchisement, including the disenfranchisement of many married women. And when I say unnecessary, I do mean unnecessary, because as of yet, there has been zero proof provided that there is a widespread issue of ineligible registrations happening. What we do have proof of is the disenfranchisement of eligible voters.